Well, thank you very much for bringing the private sector angle, the market angle to the discussions. But the good thing is that it somehow aligns with the suggestions that have all come here. What I get from that, because it helps me to summarize, is that the carbon tax is an agenda that must be taken from here to COP28. And I also agree with it as a banker, because you are right. You use tax and subsidies to make sure that you direct certain actions where you want them to go. So I think that is one of the things. And there's also a consensus on reforming the international financial architecture. I don't want to call it architecture. The way the international financial system operates. And that's not just the multilateral. You touched on even the rating agencies. People can also talk about how the stock exchanges operate, if you want to extend it to all those. So I think a comprehensive approach to it is important. And as I agree that the part of the problem is that the negotiations we have is David and Goliath negotiation. Incidentally, the person we should be telling to do more is the Goliath. And the others are the Lilliput, who really should be treated more fairly. But your voice can't rise to that level. But by coming together as Africans, coming together with the Caribbean, Latin America, and having politicians like the Deputy Prime Minister, I think we can start forming a consensus, which started last year in Sharm el-Sheikh. For the first time, loss and damage came on the table. It means some progress is being made. It's a common problem for everybody, and we must make sure we all work together, rich and poor, those who emit and those who don't emit, to make sure we solve it. So thank you. I would now invite, I think, President Ruto to say the last word.
Maybe just three things. I want to agree with the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance that in this debate, there are no sides. We're on the same side. And we need to begin to drive this from the same side, because the risk that we face when this place burns, it will burn with everybody. The emitters and the non-emitters, the people from the south and the people from the north. That is settled. And because of that, we need to listen very carefully to what Mo Ibrahim is saying. We need to listen very carefully to what Mo Ibrahim is saying. Whether it is carbon tax, and then I believe that that conversation is overdue. If we will not be having a conversation about carbon tax in COP27, and not just that conversation, on the mechanism of the how, and with a proper timeline, then we will not have a meaningful conversation. Number two is the conversation around rating agencies. Credit rating agencies are destroying our economies. We have to be honest with them. Their algorithm is faulty. They are not using empirical science. And I'm saying this as a scientist myself. There is a problem, a big problem with credit rating agencies. And in some instances, they are conflicted. And there must be a candid conversation about their data, their findings, and whether they are doing the right thing. And finally, is to say, as Africa, we will be putting together the Nairobi Declaration that is going to be candid, bold, and practical for us to carry that conversation into the UN General Assembly and into COP28.
We're all on the same side. If we burn, everyone burns. His Excellency William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, thank you so much for that conversation, wonderfully hosted by Professor Benedict Orama. Thanks everyone for a great discussion, and to Mo Ibrahim, if you break it, you own it, and reminding us too that there actually is a silver bullet, carbon tax, which His Excellency President Ruto said really has to be on the agenda at COP, regardless of whether it's a David and Goliath negotiation. Today, government leaders have been gathering here to discuss a vision for a greener future. A private sector declaration was signed under the leadership of Equity Group and Dr. James Mwangi, together with international collaborators such as the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council, the East African Business Council, and the Africa Business Leaders Coalition of the UN Global Compact, among others. This declaration in support of government is a commitment to combating climate change by the private sector, which acknowledges the importance of coordination between the public and private sectors to achieve the shared goal of climate action for resilience and green growth. Alongside the Nairobi Declaration, this private sector statement will be heard during the upcoming United Nations General Assembly, the World Bank, IMF, Marrakesh meetings, and at COP28 as the private sector voice of Africa, offering its own commitment to responsible solutions related to climate change. I'd like now to introduce Dr. James Mwangi, Group MD and CEO of Equity Group Holdings, for more to discuss on the global finance architecture and the private sector's point of view. Please, everyone, a very warm applause and welcome to Dr. James Mwangi.
Hey, bana ba Kenya namugezeni mulembe. Mulembe lundi. Waya mumbe kama lumwelezera ko ule ko kubanenda kama tunda. Ko buru mu Kenya. Waya mumbe kama lumwelezera ko ule ko kubanenda kama tunda.
Thank you very much for a great day. I commend all of you for your patience. I assure you, Your Excellency, President Ruto, that we have heard you, and we want now to give the multilateral development banks an opportunity to respond. We want to give the global financial experts an opportunity. They have been in the room. They have heard what has been said, and hopefully they can give us their way forward to the issues that has been raised by the African leaders and the private sector. Without much ado, I want to invite Dr. Akiumi Adeshina, If additional you are present, quickly, Honorable Silusua, Minister of State for Development, Franconia and International Partnerships. Honorable Babel Kolfa, Parliamentary State Secretary, German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. Alexia Tutor, Assistant Secretary of International Trade and Development, U.S. Secretary, U.S. Treasury. Body Deputy Managing Director, International Monetary Fund. And last but not least, Axel Van, Senior Managing Director, World Bank. Thank you very much for leader being patient this afternoon. It was really great listening to the African leaders on the issues of finance. It's apparent that the big elephant in the room is finance. And it appears that the ball has been pushed to the court of the multilateral development banks and international financial institutions. I seem here to have truly the shareholders, if I may say, of those institutions, the policy decision makers. And we want to give them a chance, maybe to respond to the issues the African leaders are raising, to respond to the issues that the private sector, Mo Ibrahim, has articulated, the issues of the private sector. And broadly, if I may summarize so that we have a common understanding of the issues that has been raised, there is the issue of accessibility of finance and speed at which disbursements are made. There is a big issue of affordability, at what cost. His Excellency President Ludo said Africa pays at least 5 times. And the rationale there has been questioned because it's not an African risk. It's a global climate risk that we are talking about. And it has been said, if the world bans, we all ban on it. So it's not a country risk that we are financing. It's a climate risk. So when it comes to that issue, and there is also the question of how much is being availed. And those 3 issues seems to be really at the center of concern of the African leaders. And so we could be able to address ourselves to those issues. But there is also a question of our institutions failing to connect the dots in the way they respond, and particularly to the issue of risk. This issue, and eventually it boils down to the question of equity, fairness, justice, and equality in the world. And so it is in that light that we will be responding to the issues that we have. So without much ado, I've been told the IMF Deputy Managing Director may be catching a flight, so I will ask fellow panelists. Maybe if we could give him a chance. And the question maybe to Bo Lee is, how can you talk about IMF's role in climate financing? In particular, I know that the FAD has introduced a new tool called the Resilience and Sustainability Trust. Would appreciate hearing an update on that instrument. And finally, what are some of the keys you see to unlocking additional financing for climate adaptation, especially here in Africa?
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor first, because I have to go to the airport after this. Good afternoon. It's an honor to join this distinguished panel. I want to speak very briefly on climate finance and the challenges as we see it and how we can help. Climate finance challenges are most acute in Africa, where adaptation needs are much higher, but climate finance flows are too low. Our number shows that about 20% of all flows reach the continent of Africa, but most is geared towards mitigation. But we know adaptation needs are very high. Let me briefly touch on 4 priorities that we think are important to scale up climate finance, including adaptation finance. The first priority, we think, is to increase domestic resource mobilization. That means both public finance and also private finance domestically. International communities can work together to help African countries to build capacity, to broaden tax base, to increase public financing flow. At the same time, international community can also support African countries to build domestic capital markets, to encourage higher private savings, and also to support financial sector development. The second priority, we think, is to maximize international support. Grants and concessional financing are very important, and so is equity financing. There is already too much debt in Africa, and we need more grants, concessional financing, and equity. The IMF's new Resilience and Sustainability Trust is providing long-term concessional financing and helping countries with limited room in their budget to invest in long-term resilience, including climate. So far, programs have been approved for 10 countries, half of which are in sub-Saharan Africa. The third priority, we think, given the strained public resources, we need to find ways to crowd in private capital. We see a 3-pillar approach to crowd in private capital in scale. The first pillar is to create a policy and regulatory environment that are conducive to private finance. The second priority, we think, is technical assistance and capacity building, such as green public financial management, climate public investment management, and project preparation. IMF and MDB partners, we do a lot of technical assistance to support African countries to improve their capacity in these areas. The third pillar refers to innovative financing solutions and financing arrangement that can promote public-private partnership. The keywords here are de-risking and blending. Public sector, including international partners, need to take more calculated risks if we want to crowd in private capital. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that great contribution. Let's turn to Honorable Crisora. Crisora, France has commendably played a global leadership role in the conversation on both climate finance and reform of the global financial architecture. A key issue that has emerged in this conversation is the role of the G7 and the G8 in both mitigation and adaptation finance, especially with regard to the realization of pending pledges and commitments. And what is in the progress of on France-led initiatives like the new Global Financing Pact? What do you see as the challenges in delivering the new Global Financing Pact and architecture?
Thank you, James, and Excellencies, dear friends. First of all, I'd like to tell you that it's an honor for me also to speak today on behalf of President Macron, 2 months after this important rendezvous in Paris. That was the Paris Summit for a new global financial pact, as you said. And so I'd like to thank Kenya and particularly President Ruto for this historic summit. So, as you said, we listen the African friends and African voices. We listened today, but it's for many years that France and the European Union, we listen the voices, the priorities, but also the solutions. So, I think you asked me about G7. I'd like to speak about my country. And in European Union, it's the same, but I would like to speak about France, because I think we believe in leading by example. And we believe on SDR reallocation and what we did, you know, with 40% of French SDRs reallocated towards vulnerable countries. We deliver on climate finance with 6 billion euros per year for our partners, 23, I see my colleague from Germany, 23 billions European Union, that is, we take our responsibilities. We deliver on debt treatment in the Paris Club and common framework. This is important because we speak about G7, but it's the time to say what we do, each of us. And now, as I said, we make our part, but we see also the global injustice, James. And it is true, as you said, that you have to build now a more inclusive and just international financial system who can fit the challenges of the new century. And so you spoke to me about the Paris Summit. It was the beginning, and now we continue here in Nairobi, and all together we hope to arrive to COP28 with some results. In Paris, we achieved some important results. The first results. The first was to put together all of them, G7, countries from G7, from G20, the international financial institution, the UN, the small islands, because only together we can build something new. The second is that we have absolutely to restore the trust. If there's no trust, we cannot go forward. And that's why I told you for the first time, we achieve the targets, 100 billion for SDRs and climate finance, and the debt of Zambia, that was very important. So, last, I'd like to say that we propose also a common roadmap, and this roadmap that we call Paris Pact for People and Planet. It is simple. At the end of the story, no country has to choose, no government has to choose between fighting poverty or fighting for the planet. So it is very important. The second thing that we believe, all of us, because there are 30 countries who signed and we believe this roadmap that we push, it is that each country must be able to define their own strategy. And we have to just to support them. And of course, as you said, also the colleague, they said more money, and not only public money, because we put the public money. How the private sector will come, how we can create this shock. So just to finish, I'd like to say that we see two major issues for this climate summit in Nairobi. The first, that we have to advance the discussion on international taxation. This is very important. The second one, yes, everybody has to participate if we want to save our planet. So tax on fossil fuels, on shipping emission, financial transaction could unlock massive resources. And this is very, very important. And of course, we spoke about the debt. The debt, yes, we cannot cancel the debt. There's not a magic, but it is not acceptable that African countries spend more on debt services than on climate action. So we have to strengthen the things that we have, like the common framework. And this is something that France and many of us, and of course I think the European Union, we believe. And I'd like to say that President Ruto said that global north versus global south narrative is not possible. I would like to say that I disagree. I totally agree with President Ruto, and I don't like this division. There's not global north and global south. There are global leaders and global laggards, and there are both in the north and in the south. So Kenya is definitely a leader. I think France and EU, we are a leader. So thanks, James, and.
Thank you very much. It's really, we have been brought to a common framework of decision making, irrespective of whether south or north. Thank you very much. Let's come to you, Honorable Barbara Kolfa. Germany has been a significant player in the global conversation on climate, finance, and the reform of global financial architecture. What elements do you regard as the most pertinent when it comes to leveraging more climate finance? And what are the biggest challenges in realizing them? Which steps is Germany taking to enhance climate finance?
Well, thank you. There's so many questions. I was just wondering if there's a fifth one coming. But thanks, James, for the questions. And thanks for having me at that conversation here, because I really want to underline what also Chris Fuller was saying. I really like the spirit of this summit, which is a spirit looking for solutions for global challenges and global big problems. And I really want to thank also the Kenyan government for inviting us and for having us and for pushing us forward. That is very important. I think it's crystal clear. Facts are telling us, researchers are telling us, we have to act now. That was the sentence I heard most in that conference. We had all the facts on the table, but we have to act now. So there are, in our opinion in Germany, two layers, I would say, where we have to act. The one is nationally, what we can do nationally on mitigation. I think there is no country in the room who has not room for improvement and becoming better in fulfilling the Paris alignment and really reaching all the national targets in reducing carbon dioxide and equivalents. That is the first challenge, and that's a financial challenge also. But secondly, it's of course about international climate financing on mitigation and on adaptation, so both. One point I would love to say is I think we also have to stop promising at conferences there. We have to deliver. That is coming from the discussion to the action. I'm very glad to hear from my colleague from France about the 6 billion France is fulfilling this year. I'm very happy that we have figures for 22 now that we fulfilled in 22 in Germany, the 6 billions. We will struggle and we will continue that. Together with private sector engagement, we are about $9.5 billion in that case. So I think that is a good step in the direction of the 100 billion. That is something for proving that we are delivering. So climate finance, I think there are two kind of countries who should invest. And that's, of course, traditional donors. They have the obligation to do more to fulfill what they promise. I would love also to invite those who are new emittents, who are new large emitters, also to come and contribute their share. I would invite that to do so before COP already on the Green Climate Funding Summit in Bonn in October this year. So we are pledging Germany 2 million there, and I use the opportunity to invite everybody who feels the pressure to come up also with their ideas on financing. So that's the financing part. That's the financing part. But we were talking also, and I heard very well what leaders here in the panel before were saying. It's about international financing architecture as well. It's about the World Bank reform. It's about how to finance global public goods aligned with the traditional necessities, I would say, in financing development needs and financing those who are really suffering and are the poorest. And it has to be done both. And we have to have reforms which are at the end of the day opening this space and opening this money, and is then at the end of the day also coming up with a better access. We were talking about ratings before, but with a better access to this money also for countries who want to invest in climate change and who are not don't have the possibility now. And the third point I also want to make is, was mentioned by my colleague from France, is about debts. We really, really cannot ignore what's going on in various countries. Also, the leaders here were talking about 9 African countries running into deep troubles already. So it is necessary that we timely come up with decisions by the common framework. I know how challenging that is, but there has to be a decision about that to support those countries. It's about debt relief on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's also about swaps. I think we should talk about debt to climate swaps and those topics also. My country is or was announcing here in that conference a swap which we arranged with Kenya and Kenyan government, and it's a debt to climate swap, investing in rural areas and investing in local farmers, which I think is also something quite necessary. So in a nutshell, 3 things. We have to fulfill the financial commitments, all of us, and also new donors. We have to fulfill our national commitments on mitigation, and we have to really come up with a reform of the World Bank and the development banks to open up space and financial spaces for the member countries on this planet, and we have to solve the debt crisis. My government is there for fighting for those 3 goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Riri.
I was expecting a very challenging conversation this afternoon, but
I'm very impressed by the level of alignment. Let's turn to Alexia. The US has played a very important role in global leadership in various areas since the end of the Second World War, particularly in the development of current global financial architecture. Just like then, we are faced with another issue of significant global importance, the climate crisis. Africa, unfortunately, is living the effects of this climate crisis that it didn't play a significant part in creating. How do you see the role of America global leadership moving forward with regard to climate finance in Africa? Of particular interest to Africans, the United States made a pledge of $21 billion in special drawing right. What is the progress on that commitment, and how can the United States play a leadership role in honoring of commitments within the G7 and the G20?
Thank you so much. James, I'll try to answer all those questions. If I may, I'd like to correct just one thing you said when you opened up the panel. You said now the shareholders are, here on the panel. I think we've been hearing, as President Ruto reminded us, from shareholders all day. So this is just a few extra ones, James, on the table. So it's really a privilege to be here at the Africa Climate Summit. I think this summit has proved to be truly a pivotal moment in a year of ambition for trying to partner with emerging and developing countries, including here in Africa, to really rise to the challenge of the moment. And as President Ruto also said, this really is indeed a global pre-COP. That's how significant I think these past few days have been. President Ruto talks often about the importance of clear communication, of stating what is needed clearly, of listening attentively so that we can then act collectively. And I have heard very clear messages here in Nairobi. And what is heartening is I actually see a lot of alignment on some of those messages, James. What's at stake, I think, is clear. In our uncertain world, the one thing that is certain is that shocks there will be. And what's disturbing is that these shocks are coming fast, they're furious, and they're highly frequent. And they hit first and hardest the most vulnerable countries and communities, including the countries that have the least means and fiscal space to respond to them, to rebuild, not to mention to actually prepare for them. I think the second thing that is very clear is that climate change demands new approaches. And the Nairobi Declaration, I haven't seen the final version, but the drafts that I've been seeing, the latest draft I saw, there is so much in there that the United States can fully subscribe to. And I think it really does lay out a path of what is needed with respect to these new approaches. So let me now quickly share 4.5 points to answer, James, your more specific question about US leadership. And I should say, US leadership will only work if it's in partnership. So first point is indeed evolving the MDBs. Secretary Yellen, about a year ago now, launched a call for the development banks to evolve to provide 21st century solutions to 21st century challenges. And she laid out 4 areas where she thought those reforms were very important. And there's now a broad coalition supporting this work. The first one was around the mission and the vision of the development banks. And that's really a simple message, which is that sustained progress on poverty reduction and achieving the sustainable development goals will not be possible if we don't address global challenges, climate change first and foremost. And I think President Ruto said it yesterday, the goals of climate change and development are positively reinforcing. Secretary Yellen often says mutually reinforcing. I think it's the same message. Second area of reform is around incentives. And the Nairobi Declaration talks about incentives for countries to make investments that are climate aligned. And it's true that we're asking countries to make investments that have benefits that often are regional and global. And so it's only fair that in such cases, the global community helps to pay for the cost of these investments. So that's about incentives. Thirdly is around the operational model of the MDBs. And we talked about the importance of agility and speed and responsiveness to the needs of your countries. That's part of the agenda. Part of the agenda is also making sure that climate change is integrated from the very first diagnostics that are done to implementation through country strategies, to monitoring, learning, and evaluation, including in the corporate scorecard to hold the institutions to account. There's talk in the Nairobi Declaration about the importance of working with cities, and we've also asked the development banks to be able to do more at the subnational level. Fourthly, and where everyone usually starts, James, is financial capacity, which has been a big topic here. So obviously, to be able to respond to this more complex agenda, the development banks need to have more wherewithal to be able to deliver. And so stretching the balance sheets of the institutions responsibly, focusing on domestic resource mobilization, helping countries build here in Africa deep capital and debt markets, that's all part of the agenda.